When I first moved to Bulgaria, I met a guy who I'll always remember, who is the guy that I attribute to the person that really woke me up to how things are. And I got great memories of him, great memories of the time we used to talk about conspiracies and how he was so far ahead of me. And I think it's a very interesting story because we all feel that we're right about things, and I'll always remember how I felt when he was telling me things like the royal family in the UK and how the power distribution around the world was, and not democracy and all this kind of stuff. And I just got this this memory of the feeling of certainty that I had, that there's no way this guy is right. There's no way this guy knows. How would he know? It's not even English. All this kind of stuff. And he said to me once, England is the biggest communist country in the world. And I remember thinking, dude, I don't know what you even mean by that, but there's no way that's true. And I remember walking away thinking, how can people think such strange things and get things so wrong? And I think it's an interesting thing to remember, because I believe now that I was the one that was wrong. But the level of certainty, and I don't even consider myself to be that high in epistemic certainty, because that all varies among the population. And I was extremely sure that I was the one that was right. And so it's an interesting memory. And I started to think to myself after that, I'll always remember that. And I started to think to myself after that, what variables would have needed to change for me to wake up a bit sooner? And I've come up with this. I think it's, if I'd have known that non-standard education, non-standard history, a non-standard understanding of the world, if I'd have known, firstly, I didn't understand that it was so scholarly. I thought it was hit and miss, and I thought it was randos just thinking random things. I had no idea the level of scholarship, and I had no idea how international it was. And secondly, I didn't realize that it was so coherent. I didn't know that it functions sort of non-standard. Academia functions in the same way as any other academic subject would. So you've got a center of gravity of ideas where most people that know that subject agree, like you would with any other academic subject, like in my case, linguistics. And then you have the people that think more on the periphery. So really, kind of non-standard, non-approved, non-state approved ways of thinking and scholarship and academia fit exactly as any other kind of science. And so if I'd have known that, if I'd have known those two things, I would have been into that a lot earlier, because I'm quite high in intellectual curiosity and wasted a lot of time on a lot of nonsense. And I would have loved to, and I'm quite envious of the younger generation, because they're onto it a lot quicker for obvious reasons. And I would have loved that, because I used to read quite a lot when I was younger. And well, someone said, I don't know if you guys follow Academic Agent. It's a very good channel on YouTube. But he thinks that the books pre-1945 are really the only ones worth reading. Well, I didn't read anything pre-1945, not really. And so, a lot of time wasted. And I would have loved to have, loved to have had access to the information that people have access to now. They're absolutely awesome. So a lot of time wasted. And so this guy, George, who's my friend from up in the ski resort, he's the guy that I attribute to waking me up. And I texted him the other day and I said, George, you were right and I was wrong. And I did think to myself, and this, I'm really grateful for this, even though we got on well, even though we didn't agree at the time on these issues, I was always respectful to him. And I think it's a big problem for us in society when we come across people that we don't necessarily agree with, and we dismiss them, and we're mocking of them, we make fun of them, and all that does is make a rod for our own back. Now, George and I didn't agree, but we got on really well, and I was completely respectful to him. I didn't laugh at him, I didn't mock at him or anything like that. And when you treat people respectfully in that way, it makes it much easier for you to change your mind. Imagine if the opposite had been the case. Imagine if I'd have, not just with George, but with all kinds of people. Imagine if I'd have made fun of everyone and laughed at everyone, you know, in that kind of mocking way, condescending way. If I'd have done that openly in public, perhaps even online, well, I don't do that kind of thing online, but people do. If I'd have mocked these people, it would have been very difficult for me, for my ego to then change my mind, for me to have to admit it to myself, to them. And so that's what happens. And I think that's why when an event happens, that's why they blast us with propaganda in the beginning, because they want us to get that kind of almost 100% epistemic certainty, so that, and then that plays with our ego. Well, you'll notice that whenever an event happens, that the strength of the propaganda is right at the beginning, and they encourage people to mock those that are dissenters. And I think that's all to do with sort of stimulating the ego, so that people won't change their mind. Because once you spent all that time making fun of people and calling them stupid, when actually it was you that was wrong the whole time, then it's hard for people to change their mind. And I think that's what they want. It's like it's almost like they're stuck. They're stuck in the first thing that they thought. And it's just a question of who gets to them first. Almost like children. Like whoever is the first person to get to them first, to influence them, because of their ego, they won't change their mind after that. So I think that's a very important thing for all of us to remember, to try and be humble, but also to be respectful. You don't know what other people, you never know what you don't know. You never know if someone might have a grain of truth in what they're saying. Maybe if they're saying something extraordinary, it may have taken them a bit of extra effort to come up with. And given that extra effort, maybe it's worth listening to them. So you live and learn. I'm not saying I've always been that way. Maybe I think it's much harder when you're younger. Younger people are obviously the way they are, a bit more kind of arrogant, because they're a bit more insecure. That's the other thing. So if we can acquire a bit of intellectual security, because as I often mention, I do notice that I think the Brits, the single most outstanding thing about the Brits in general, wasn't like this in the 90s, but they're really lacking in, they seem really insecure. And if we can make sure that we get a good grasp of the world intellectually, and we make an effort to try, as long as we're honest with ourselves, and we're not pretending to know things we don't know, then we'll have the intellectual security. Because most of the time, people are pretending to know things they don't know, almost all of the time. So if you can just be honest, and you can just make the effort, and if you fail and you get it wrong, it doesn't matter. You'll know why you got it wrong. You can trace your steps back to how you reasoned yourself into that position in the first place. And you know, we go back to that old classic expression, it's very hard to reason someone out of a position that they didn't reason themselves into the first place, which means the opposite is true. So if we always try to apply reason and a little bit less emotion, then every time we make a mistake and we get something wrong, in theory, we should be able to reason our way back out of it and learn from each mistake that we make. Bearing in mind, if we do that, we're going to be in a small minority of people, and it's going to be a massive advantage for us. Overwhelming majority of people are not intellectual thinkers. They're very emotional. I don't know what the stat is for abstraction, but I think something like maybe 70% of people can't even think in the abstract. So if we can be humble in what we think about things and be better at agreeing to disagree with people, as long as they're respectful to you, of course. That goes without saying. If people are being social idiots, then clearly you don't want to have anything to do with those types. But if they're being respectful, man, we don't know what we don't know. Nobody knows what they don't know. So that's the story I wanted to talk about with regard to conspiracies. I do think they're fascinating. I noticed that when I started to learn more about conspiracies, I found that it had a really positive effect on my mental health. And now I don't know whether it's because there's an intrinsic truth to them, or whether because it's less tribal. And so even if there's not the intrinsic truth to the conspiracy theory in question, at least the honest and genuine pursuit of truth is good for you, compared to the tribalism, and it's kind of like anti-intellectual tribalism that you see on X and in the media. So I found them to be really good for you. I was with two friends the other day. Well, one that I don't know that well, and he was a flat earther. And my friend that I know well, when he left, we thought to ourselves, yeah, that's a bit unusual. I haven't really met many people like that before. And but I did start to think to myself, well, I bet even like a flat earther, I bet would know a lot more about how the countries work, the world works in general terms, about corruption, about perverse incentives, all these things. I bet a flat earther, in fact I'm bloody sure of it, the average flat earther would know more about how the world works than the average mainstream media consumer, for example, the average normie. I don't know if that's good or bad. I feel that's a bit sad, Because at the end of the day, the government is doing that to people on purpose. They're doing their absolute best to get people to be as dumbed down as they can. And I just think it's sad. I mean, if you had a like twin brothers, and they were arguing all the time about, let's say they were arguing about football, but they knew about football and they understood football and they were rivals, you'd say fair enough, that's what boys do and all kind of healthy stuff. But if you had the same situation and they were arguing about 2 Premier League games, let's say, but they had absolutely no understanding of anything to do with football, and all they would do is argue, you would say about their parents that that's child abuse. Well, that's basically the situation with us vis-a-vis our government. It's like child abuse. They know perfectly well that we don't know anything about these subjects, and then they sit and watch us argue on purpose, encourage us to argue on purpose, and, well, like I say, if parents did that to children, that would be abuse. So I'm going to finish this video here, and wish you all a good day, and speak to you next time. Cheers, guys.